Cheers, big ears. I'm not kidding. That might actually be one of my favorite lines ever written for Star Trek, like, ever. Hello, interwebs! I'm gonna put this bottle of Chateau Picard down right over here, and welcome to my review of the season premiere of Star Trek Picard Season 2, Episode 1, The Stargazer. Which, by the way, come on, how did no one ever use that title in an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation before? It just seems so obvious now. Like, I'm betting that the writers of the season premiere were like, wait, can we use, no one did this before? Can we call it the Stargate? That feels too on the nose. It's literally Picard's ship. But my jokes about the title aside, I am very excited to be here to review a brand new season of Star Trek Picard. That being said, this is going to be a review of just the premiere episode. But if all things went according to plan, which, knowing me, they probably didn't. But more than likely, earlier today, I released a video that was my spoiler-free review of the first 3 episodes of Star Trek Picard Season 2 because I was graciously given access to those first 3 episodes. So this video is only going to be just about the first episode, the premiere of that season, of this season. And if you want my thoughts of the first 3 episodes, go check out that video. Again, there'll be no spoilers. Also, it should be said that I'm actually recording this review before actually having watched the next 2 episodes. So don't worry, there is no chance for spoilers of episodes 2 or 3 because quite literally at the time of this recording I have not watched them. I'm actually planning on watching them immediately after this. So all that being said, I don't know what I said in that first video because I haven't filmed it yet, so let's get into my spoiler-free thoughts of just this episode, and then we'll get into spoilers in just a moment. So staying spoiler-free up front, I think this episode was really intriguing and really hooked me back into this era and version of Star Trek. I've made no bones about the fact that I think Star Trek Picard Season 1 was my biggest disappointment in this current modern era of Star Trek right now. While I loved a lot of the ideas and concepts that show introduced in the first few episodes of that season, I was really disappointed by how that season wrapped up and kind of a perfunctory and kind of frustrated me. So I think this episode had a lot of heavy lifting to do to really just hook me back into what they were trying to do with this show after such a letdown of the season finale. And I have to say, I think they did a really, really good job. Most of this episode is doing the sort of like brickwork and like where are they now with all of the characters, sort of showing what happened between the end of Star Trek Picard Season 1 and our new season here. So we get our characters sort of in new places. And I think overall what fascinated me most about this new status quo that we're entering into is how much it kind of addressed some of the, I think more, I want to say superficial, but I don't want to like discount them that much. The sort of like more on the surface level issues that a lot of people had with Star Trek Picard Season 1 that I sort of agreed with in some aspects and sort of didn't. First off, I think the tone of this season so far is much brighter and more optimistic. A lot of people had a sort of bad taste in their mouth over the first 2 episodes of Picard Season 1 and kind of the whole season because it felt a little bit more dour and depressing, which has been kind of a constant theme for a lot of Star Trek, especially Star Trek Picard Season 1 and Star Trek Discovery Season 1 and going a little bit into Season 2, though lessening more over time. And I really am starting to see the writers of all Star Treks nowadays really shifting more into a more optimistic tone, which personally, I mean, obviously that's what Star Trek is. People want that bright, optimistic, utopian vision. I actually didn't mind the more deconstructionist tone, but I just getting into it, it feels more refreshing to sort of get things a little bit more positive instead of sort of dour and deconstruction-y. That being said, what I really liked about this episode, though, was that it kept this slower pace. I mean, if you look at Discovery Season 4 and even Season 3 and all that stuff, it just sort of starts off with a bang and just keeps going like fast, action, adventure sort of stuff. Whereas this episode really just felt much slower paced. It took its time. While there is a bigger mystery building up in the background of this episode, we are certainly like taking our time to get there. The show is in no rush, and it really is focusing more on investigating and interrogating Picard, and then also showing us where our other characters that we came to know and love over the first season are. And I think some of them are a lot of fun. And another thing that I think a lot of people had frustrations with, and I'm a little bit more mixed on, is we get a ton more of Starfleet here. You know, we get to see on Starfleet ships on the 25th century. We get to see interiors of the 25th century Starfleet ships. We get to see Starfleet Academy. We have a bunch of characters now in Starfleet who weren't in Starfleet back in Season 1 of Picard. And I think for a lot of people that will that'll make the show instantly feel more instantly Star Trek to them. I'm a little bit more mixed on that, just because one of the things I actually enjoyed about Picard Season 1 is that we got to see a bit more of a civilian side of the Star Trek universe, which is something we don't really often get in Star Trek, and I think with a show that has a more upbeat, optimistic tone, I like to see something a little less militaristic. Not that, the debate around whether or not Starfleet's a military is its own whole question, but it definitely has a very militaristic overtones to it. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Starfleet, but that was a little bit of the thing that I liked about Picard Season 1. That's a little bit lost here. But again, that being said, I'm mixed on it because I was like, oh, this is really cool to see 25th century Starfleet ships and what they look like and what this like kind of slightly post-TNG, slightly post-Lower Decks era of Starfleet looks like. And I think they did a great job updating that for the screen. Even further, I think where we meet a lot of the characters in this season is kind of surprising. There's a couple spots I'm like, oh, I would not have expected that character to be here. But I really kind of enjoyed the sort of streamlining and new places that they've taken our characters. But not forgetting the problems of Star Trek Picard Season 1. Like, there's definitely addressing of some of the issues that happened at the end of that season. Like, for example, Jurati mentioning that she, like, literally went on trial for having murdered her ex-boyfriend in last season, which, again, the interesting dynamics of Jurati having dated Maddox aside, I think is, I just liked and appreciated that it didn't, like, sweep those things aside, but it's sort of, like, resetting the tone here. That also being said, with this more slower paced tone of this episode, it does take a lot of time to really start to interrogate and bring up the themes of this season. Namely, I think the two biggest things are Picard's love life and the theme of time and aging. In fact, the word time probably gets said a bazillion times in this episode. It kind of beats you over the head with like, we're gonna have the season be about time. It's about time travel. Do you get it? Like, it's very much kind of a little bit over the top with its thematics throughout the episode. But that being said, I think where it really better fits, not just the over the top time stuff and like time constantly moves and time is the fire in which we burn sort of thing, but we get a much slower paced interrogation of Picard himself. And really, instead of the more deconstructionist tone of season 1, we get a look more at like an evolution of where Picard is as a character and some things that like were intrinsic within his character, like Picard Season 1 addressed, with him sort of like never really dealing with the consequences of his actions, whereas this one's more dealing with the fact that why did Picard never choose to have a love life? Why did he never pursue Dr. Crusher, for example? And I really appreciated that. My only frustration with that, mentioning Crusher, is that while we have a setup for a new romantic interest, who we'll talk about in just a minute, I have thoughts on that in the spoiler section, I'm a bit frustrated by this episode's reticence to like mention TNG related stuff. It feels like it just wants to be very clearly separate from Next Generation, while also bringing in a lot of Next Generation stuff, specifically Guinan and Q, who that's not a spoiler, they're in the trailers for the show, and in the promotional art and all that stuff, so I don't think that's big surprise there. But it also, like, doesn't mention Crusher, which I get it, you don't want to, like, beat me over the head with references, but I mean, like, I feel like if you're talking about Picard and love life, you should mention Beverly Crusher at some point. And so it's just a little bit frustrating that there's a little bit of hesitance and reticence to address those things throughout the episode. But overall, I do really like the theme of interrogating why Picard never chose to pursue a love life and really sort of honing in on that throughout this. And finally, it should be said, while most of this episode is place setting of our characters and seeing where they are at now, I think it would be remiss of me to say that there is actually an intriguing brewing mystery going on in the background of this episode, all leading to about the final 20 minutes, which is straight up just Star Trek big budget action and a recurring presence and a mysterious presence from an old enemy who I don't want to spoil just yet here. We'll talk about it more when we get into episode 2 discussions when I watch that episode, so I won't spoil it here, but an old mystery, an old enemy comes back in the final part of this episode in a brand new way that has me very intrigued, because there's a lot of questions with what all of that means that has me kind of excited to see what they're going to do with this particular menace in the Star Trek universe and what they might be trying to do with these types of characters. So while the show definitely has a slower pace than, say, Discovery, it's by no means a slouch when it comes to the plot department. Oh, also, I should mention, like, another superficial thing that they addressed. Many people complained about the, like, one, copy and paste ship that they used at the end of Star Trek Picard Season 1. They fixed that for this. We get tons of new Starfleet ship designs, and they all look freaking gorgeous. Love it. Absolutely love it. So to wrap up my spoiler-free thoughts on this, I really think that this episode took the sour note that I sort of had at the end of Star Trek Picard Season 1 and has started taking it in a really new direction, has me excited, took the elements that I really loved about that show, and has started placing them in a new way that has me excited for what they're going to bring with this new season. So very excited and very optimistic on the season as a whole, but that being said, my biggest problem with Picard Season 1 was not how it started, but more how it ended. So we'll see if that continues to grow into the coming episodes. But that being said, that's my spoiler-free thoughts done. Let's dive in to the spoilers. Alright, now that we're in spoiler-filled section, I've got a lot of things to say, so let's get right through it. I'm going to go through the episode beat by beat and just talk about the stuff that I didn't mention in my spoiler-free section. The opening of the episode starts off mid-action. We get to see these Starfleet crew members, security members, like running up to the bridge. I love the tension and action that we see in here. It's very clearly just thrusting us in the middle. We get to see what a Starfleet ship looks like, very much the J.J. Abrams style of running through corridor stuff. But I also like the beat of like tension that we have when they enter the turbolift, and the characters just have to stand there and quiet for a moment before going in and getting attacked. And I thought that there was just a great buildup of tension in these first few moments to like get us really into the action of it. And then immediately we get to see like, wait, Rios is wearing a Starfleet uniform? What's Picard doing on a Starfleet ship? Girardi's there? 7 of 9's there? What is going on? It was very, very fun and sort of set us up for the self-destruct sequence that will be coming back around at the end of the episode. Great way to just get us in on the action and have me excited and promise something that the episode eventually delivers upon. But then we get a brand new title sequence. It basically takes the same idea from season 1, but it has a much more upbeat and sinister tone to the theme music, and I really loved it. I love some of the visuals that they did throughout this opening credit sequence, like bringing in the like Borg ship stuff and all of that stuff, and like the Serena like going across the timeline sort of thing. Really beautiful. Again, just absolutely beautiful title sequence. I love the new updated look. I missed the more melancholic version from season 1, but this is a good one to match the more faster pace that this season seems to be going for a little bit more towards the end. Then we jump back 4 days earlier and we meet Picard back at his vineyard. Really sweet to see this. We get to see a brief shot of number 1. Sadly, the dog will not be sticking around, I bet, because of how much apparently that dog was a bit of a pain on set, unfortunately, but I'm sure he's a very good boy otherwise. But then we get a scene with Laris and Picard sort of talking about time and the fact that, you know, this is the end of the season and that sort of thing. And this was a very, very sweet scene. A couple things that come out of this dialogue, though, is when we learn that Zhaban has died, which is deeply upsetting. I loved Laris and Zhaban last season, and while Laris was certainly the more entertaining of the two characters that we saw, missing Zhaban was kind of a little bit sad because he also seemed like an intriguing character I would have loved to learn more about, and it seems that they dismissed him so that they could create this idea of Laris wanting to be with Picard and trying to convince him that maybe they should be together. Yeah, this was the one part of the episode that kind of threw me a little bit. Not because I couldn't buy it, but it just felt very much like, oh, we're gonna fridge Zhaban so we can do this thing and get more at the theme of this. It felt a little bit forced to my mind. But it did get at the idea of Picard never having been in a long-term relationship and always eschewing that. Again, this is where, as I mentioned in my spoiler-free section, I'm like, why do we not mention Crusher? I mean, I get maybe not in this scene, but in a later sequence with Guinan. Like, I mean, I feel like the mention of Crusher would come up here. But otherwise, I do think that this was a very sweet scene, and you could feel the awkwardness in that final moment of Picard being like, nah, sorry, not gonna, I'm gonna almost, nah. It was like, oh boy, Jean-Luc, you are an awkward, like, come on, you can't do that to a girl. So overall, I liked the scene, but I didn't like some of the ways that it chose to get to what they were trying to do with the scene. Then we get a quick little flashback with Picard as a kid, and we get to see Picard's mother, who I am curious to see. I'm sure the fact that they cast his mother and that she's appearing in flashbacks is going to play some role in future episodes of this season because we're dealing with time travel. So I'm sure Picard's mother, who I think we're seeing for the very first time, we might have seen her in a flashback or something like that, dream sequence in Next Generation, but I don't think so. So this is interesting to get a little bit more about Picard's childhood here. But then we get a quick little look at this anomaly ripping open in space, which is a cool little visual technique that they had going on there, but we'll come back to that in just a moment, because we have Picard the next morning looking for a book by Spock, of all people, which was really nice to see. And then we also get him coming and encountering Laris, who's like, look, I don't do awkwardness, my dude, so things have to change now, and Picard sort of still having cold feet about getting with her. So again, just super awkward. But then we jump over to Picard giving a speech at Starfleet Academy. And a couple cool things here too. We get to see that Raffi is back in Starfleet. She's no longer kicked out of Starfleet as we saw at the end of season 1 of Picard. Picard himself is probably back in Starfleet. At the very least, it looks like he's oversees Starfleet Academy now. We also get to see in the background there is a Bajoran flag, which might hint that the Bajor might have finally joined the Federation after the events of Deep Space Nine, which is also cool to see. And we also see that Elnor has joined Starfleet as well. So a lot of our characters, and even Rios, who we'll see in just a minute, have all joined back up with Starfleet, which makes this a much more Starfleet-centric show than it used to be, which, again, I have mixed feelings about, but I talked about that already. That being said, Picard's speech is, again, another spot where we hear a lot of him talking about time, like, the final frontier is time. I'm very shocked that we didn't have him say at some point that, like, time is the fire in which we burn, or, as he said in Generations, like, time is like an old friend, or whatever the speech was. I actually think that, like, time coming for Picard is an apt metaphor. I mean, honestly, time has been a theme throughout all of Star Trek. I mean, look at, like, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, about Kirk aging in that movie, Star Trek Generations, as I mentioned before. Like, time has been a fairly common theme for Star Trek, and so to bring it back up here in the context of Picard makes certain sense, but again, they kind of beat it over the head a little bit here. But then we meet up with La Sirena, and we see that 7 of 9 has taken over the ship, and she took all the holograms that Rios had and made them into one, just Emmett, which I think was a little bit sad for me because I liked all the different holograms that we got to see last season, but it probably makes sense to just consolidate them down into one character, and Emmett was certainly one of the more fun ones, so I like that sort of addition here, and that he has this sort of therapeutic relationship with 7 of 9, and also 7 having to deal with some discrimination with her being an XB that we hear with some of the people trying to take over the ship. So again, a little bit of a place-setting scene for where 7 is at, that she's isolated herself, and that she's off doing Fenris Ranger stuff with La Sirena. But then we meet up with Soji and Jurati, and we find out that Soji has basically been doing a tour of the galaxy after the synth ban, trying to make connections and trying to basically be a diplomat for the synths, which was kind of cool to see. And then we also have Jurati basically being her, hanging around with her and getting drunk and just having a not great time all the time, but she's, you know, just her awkward self. But I also like seeing the camaraderie and interplay between her and Soji, and then also later her and Rios. It just felt that you get the sense that they felt like friends, all of these characters together after the events of Star Trek Picard Season 1. And I just like the back and forth and friendship that we got to see between all of them, and really a sense of evolved their relationship that I deeply enjoyed. But then we get Jurati beamed up to the brand new Stargazer, which looks sexy as all hell, and we get to see that Rios is now captain of the ship, and he's a cigar chomping captain at that. It's just a lot of fun, and I like seeing his captain style. It was really cool to see Rios in the captain's chair in Starfleet, and I like just some of the stuff that we get to see, like him going make it so, and him sort of like taking on the legacy of Picard in many ways. It was just really nice to see Rios in this situation. It was just really cool after all the sort of dark places that we saw him go to in season 1, even being suicidal in some aspects. It was just nice to see him here. Back at Starfleet Academy, we have a couple scenes with Raffi and Picard. Really wonderful scene, and we get a little allusions to the fact that Raffi wants to be with 7 of 9, that they wanted to start a relationship, but 7 was off doing Ranger stuff. By the way, I should mention that I just did a review of Star Trek Picard No Man's Land, which was an audio drama starring Raffi and 7 of 9 that evolved their relationship, that I did a review of. Should be up here on my secondary channel, so check that out if you want my review of that. It was really, really wonderful. Loved that audio drama, and again, dove into that relationship specifically that I thought was a lot of fun to listen to, and I'm sure we'll get a little bit more of as we go through the rest of this season. But then we also get a quick little scene between Picard and Elnor getting a book from Spock, and Picard's basically saying, like, live a little, like, I would love to read that book. I feel like it would be a lot of fun. And also, I like the allusions to Spock here, because as we know, Spock got sent back in time to Star Trek 2009 in the Kelvin timeline, so I'm curious to hear if we will get little more pieces of what Spock's legacy now that he is officially considered dead in this timeline. Also, I wonder if we get allusions to him having helped stop the Romulan supernova in this timeline, because we haven't actually got a confirmation of that. Back on the Stargazer, 7 of 9 shows up at the ship, helping them with the anomaly, and they answer a distress call from the anomaly that has people saying, "Help us, Picard." And as we later learn, they are sending out a signal that says they wish to join the Federation, so very mysterious there. But then we jump back to Los Angeles, and we go to a bar that is will ever be called 10 Forward, because of course it is, and it is run by Guinan, Whoopi Goldberg herself. It was really wonderful to see Guinan. The camaraderie between these two actors and characters are still very palpable after all these years. We get a little bit of a hand-wavy explanations for why Whoopi Goldberg has aged in the few years since we last saw her. It's very hand-wavy, considering the El-Orients aren't supposed to age at all, but the scene was also very sweet. My only negative I have to say is that a lot of the scene, the major beats of it, we kind of have already seen inside of the trailer for Star Trek Picard Season 2, so I hope this isn't the last we see of Guinan, because it would have been a bit disappointing that a lot of what we heard here was kind of what we already saw in the trailer. But that being said, it's still a great scene with her sort of talking about like, oh, I've seen you like this before, and it has to do with love. And I like her pointing out, like, you're willing to risk your body, but not your heart. And I think that was a very sweet and very good insight by her into the character Picard. Just very, very, very insightful for her. But again, this is another scene where I'm like, why not mention Beverly? Please mention Beverly. No one's gonna mention Beverly. Like, come on. Poor Beverly. She can never win. It's also even more frustrating considering that Gates McFadden has been very clear that she was willing to engage in Star Trek, even so much to the fact that she recently appeared in Star Trek Prodigy, an episode of that show, a few weeks ago. So I'm just sort of like, get Gates McFadden in here, like mention her at the very least. But from there, we jump back to Picard's vineyard, where he gets a meeting from Starfleet. He basically gets told all the information that they know about the anomaly, and so he skips town, leaving a very disappointed Laris behind. I should also say, since this is the last we see of her, I do hope that the time travel stuff does bring Zhaban back at some point, that the stuff that we get to see with time travel later on the episode eventually will bring him back, because I did like his character, and I do think the relationship between her and Picard is a little bit forced, for my opinion. But from there, we go to the Stargazer and Picard entering on there. Picard sort of reminiscing about the old Stargazer, and Seven being a little bit uncomfortable about it for two reasons. One, because all the Starfleet crew members seem a little bit reticent around her because she is a former Borg, which also Picard is as well, and I like her being very candid with him about it. But then also the fact that the Stargazer itself was made from Borg technology from the reclamation site that we saw back in Season 1. But then we get this huge, intriguing-looking Borg ship coming through the anomaly and saying that they want to speak to Picard. And so we go into Rios' ready room, and everyone's sort of talking and discussing. And I really like this discussion because it felt very Star Trekian, where Picard's basically like, this might be the turning of history. We know the Borg have been decimated after the events of presumably Endgame with Admiral Janeway in Star Trek Voyager, and then stuff in First Contact and things like that. I am curious if there's more that's happened between now and then with the Borg that led them to be so willing to be believably wanting to seek and sow for peace. So I'm curious if that gets built out, if they'll say elements of the Star Trek Destiny book trilogy or something happened or things like that, even though that technically took place in another timeline. But regardless, I like this conversation with Picard's like, I'm willing to maybe give them the chance, but Seven's like, no, of course they're tricking us. This is just meant to be a trick. There's no way that they actually want to negotiate with us. But then this starts to bring us back to where we were at the beginning of the episode, because the Borg say that they are going to send their queen as an emissary, which, again, interesting word on the emissary there. I was like, maybe Avery Brooks, please, but I doubt it. Anyways, the queen gets over to the ship. They attack the ship, and this queen, supposedly the queen, gets on board, but it looks very different. It has a very clockworky kind of face, and shoves its tendrils into the consoles and starts attacking people, and starts taking over the little armada of ships that we get to see in the background. Also, we get to see an Excelsior class looking ship, maybe an Obina class from Star Trek Lower Decks in the background. I thought that was cool. Just a little side note there. But again, showcasing probably that they were tricking, but this feels a little bit too obvious to me, why do any trickery at all if they could just do this in the first place? So there's a part of me that's like, maybe this is actually them still sowing for peace, but doing it in a weird Borgified way. But I'm very curious to see what this new type of Borg queen or whatever it is actually is. Maybe it's a new type of Borg that is separated itself from the queen, and is sort of doing its own thing. I'm very curious to learn more about what this new type of Borg actually eventually turns out to be. But Picard tries to blow up the damn ship, and unfortunately things start to blow up, and the ship blows up as we see. But then Picard wakes up in his old vineyard, and we get to see things have changed. We get to see that sort of wearing the old black uniform that looks very similar to the movie era Star Trek uniforms, but obviously looks very fascisty. And then we also get to see a synth from Star Trek Picard Season 1, showing that the synths have been used as tools in whatever has happened to this timeline. So we're starting to get little hints at the more darker overtones of this universe. But then, of course, as we all knew we would from the trailers, Q shows up, and they did the thing that all of us knew that they were going to do, which was they had John Delancey appear for a brief hot moment looking like a young version of Q with the de-aging stuff. Didn't look that great in my opinion, but it was only there for a hot second. And he said, "Oh, you got older, Picard. Well, I'm gonna make myself older like you," and snaps his fingers, and we got older John Delancey. So that was just we all knew that was going to be the thing they were going to do, and so it's nice, like, you did the thing. And then Picard and Q kind of have a little bit of a face-off. Again, this is mostly what we saw from the trailers, so I'm glad that we're getting a lot of the trailer stuff out of the way in the first episode of the season. And he says, "The trial never ends, and welcome to the end of the road not taken." So very curious to see where that is going to go into the very next episode. Editing Jessie here with one last thing that I forgot to mention is that I really loved the way that John Delancey played Q in this brief moment that we got to see him as a much more menacing figure, kind of like how we saw him in Encounter at Farpoint and All Good Things and Q Who. Because in other appearances with Q, he kind of was a mixed bag in terms of sometimes being more menacing, sometimes being more playful, sometimes being more comedic, but my favorite version of Q was always the sort of mysterious, enigmatic, Lokian, kind of more menacing figure that we saw in episodes like Q Who would deliver that speech like, space is not for the timid, that sort of thing. So I liked that edge that we got to see here with John Delancey's Q at the end of the episode that I hope continues into episode 2. So just wanted to quick mention that here. So overall, like I said, I was very pleased with this episode. Again, it gave us a look at a 25th century Star Trek era with slight updates on the TNG look and Lower Decks look that we'd seen in those shows, but also like still feeling like its own version of the Star Trek universe that unique to Picard with those characters. Again, while I still have some reticence here and there with a couple issues, mainly with their reticence to show anything like outside of their exact purview with things like Beverly Crusher, and a little bit of beating you over the head with the theme of the episode a little bit too much. I did really like the refreshing pace and feel of this episode, which was fairly slow until it very much wasn't, and I'm intrigued by the mystery being set up here. So a strong start to the season, but again, as I said before in my spoiler-free section, my worry was not with the start of Star Trek Picard Season 2, my problem was more with how it ended. So strong starts, but we'll see where it eventually goes in the next episode. But until then, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. What did you think of the episode? Did you like it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? I'd love to hear all of that. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you, as always, live long and stay sexy, my friends.